So the Singapore Grand Prix was quite uneventful. I mean, who knew the two big things that would come out from this weekend was basically Max protesting for that absurd fine and Daniel Ricciardo potentially not being there in the next race. We're going to talk about that soon because this Grand Prix is going to be very easy to unpack. Let's start with the race start, and finally, Lando Norris did not bottle the race start. He started P1, remained P1, and he never really had any challenge throughout the race. He managed the drive pretty well. There were two instances where he was going to lose the car or make a small mistake, but he managed that well, and that was a good drive from him. And then McLaren had a lot of pace. They do very well on high downforce tracks like Singapore. There was this instance where Lando's engineer was like, you need to increase the gap to 5 seconds. It was around 1.5 to 1.8 seconds, and he immediately did that in 3 seconds. So there was a lot of pace in that car, and we had absolute domination by Norris in that race. Actually, Oscar could not show his best at the Singapore Grand Prix because he qualified quite behind. He qualified P5. So because of that, it was more of a recovery for him to come back to the podium, and he managed to do that. He finished P3, but I was quite surprised that in his last stint on the hard tires, he could not close the gap to Verstappen because then McLaren was really strong and he had clean air. But maybe by making those initial overtakes, he probably took a lot out of his tires. So while it was a great drive, great weekend for McLaren and a great third win for Lando Norris, this race was actually a win for Max Verstappen. I'll tell you why. Singapore was expected to be one of their worst tracks. You could see last year how badly they were struggling even in their dominant era. So they didn't have any expectations, and everybody expected that Max is going to be P6, P7, probably below that, and Lando would be able to extend the championship lead. This was the best race to do it. Even if you go back to my race reviews, I have said that Baku and Singapore were supposed to be the toughest races for Red Bull, and somehow Max ended up in both of the races with minimum gap from Norris. P2 was the best case scenario for Red Bull in Singapore, and Verstappen ended up achieving it. So I don't think he could have done anything more because that car doesn't really ride that well on the curbs of these tracks. I'll tell you something funny. After the Miami Grand Prix, this was the gap between Verstappen and Norris. And after so many races, McLaren has had a really good car. This is once again the gap between Verstappen and Norris. It's the same. So now the odds are even more in Verstappen's favor because now for the rest of the races, if Norris manages P1, Max manages P2, and if Norris ends up winning the sprint also and he gets the fastest lap points also, he will still not be able to close the gap to Verstappen. So it's still a monumental task for Norris. And another thing was going on during Verstappen's weekend was he was penalized for swearing in a press interview. It's so absurd. And then there was this talk about drivers should not use curse words on the radio while driving, and I don't understand this whole point. It's a sport, they are high on adrenaline, every driver does that, and you're putting mics on them 24/7. It's gonna happen, people are fine with it. I don't think it's a big deal that they're making it out to be. Plus, to penalize a driver for that, I'm happy that all of the other drivers like Norris, Hamilton, everyone stood up for Max, and they're like, just don't do this punishment and this and that. It's good all the drivers are united on this. Also great for Max to take a stand. We've seen that with other drivers in the past as well. Lewis has done it, Seb has done it. So yeah, great job. And on the other side of the garage, it was back to where Checo was before Baku because he didn't have a great qualifying. Didn't do much in the race as well because this track in general is very tough for overtaking. So it's kind of a weekend to forget for Checo, and he was really good in Baku. And since then, there were a lot of articles about how Red Bull has messed up the car, and Checo was pointing this out since ages and this and that. But this much gap between two teammates is still a bit baffling. I mean, it just can't be due to the car. But let's see what happens because Red Bull has gotten a couple of upgrades planned for the next race, which is in Texas. And that is the package that they're banking on. They're like, this should put us back into the championship race. And if it doesn't, then they're really screwed. And it's coming from McLaren as well. All the teams are bringing parts. So are Ferrari. For Ferrari, actually, this was more of a damage limitation race because they had really good race pace. You could see Leclerc's pace as well. It was really good in clean air. They were matching the McLaren. So their cars are evenly matched in race, but they kind of messed the quali. With Sainz, he crashed out, so because of that he started P10, and with Leclerc the tires were not in the right window. Initially Leclerc post qualifying said that there was some problem with the tire blankets and Ferrari didn't send him out on the right tires. That did not go well with the team, and then later on Leclerc yesterday changed the statement to saying that I should have taken more care in the out lap. So yeah, something happened there, but his tires were not in the right window, so he couldn't put out a nice lap because otherwise till Q1, Q2 he was pretty much close to the McLarens. If it wasn't for the bad qualifying, we would have seen a Ferrari battling for the podium, and they're also bringing parts for the US Grand Prix, and so are Mercedes, and their weekend was so confusing because they started third and fourth. Lewis put out a really good lap lap, and after so long he was happy after a qualifying and he was like, finally everything worked out. Then you come to Sunday and Mercedes decides to split the strategy. They put Russell on mediums, which pretty much everyone went with, and they put Lewis on softs because their logic was that initially if Lewis can make up a couple of places, this track is a bit hard to overtake, so if you can just make up that places at the race start or within the first 2 laps with the soft tires, then maybe he could have stayed on the podium. But that plan sort of backfired because the soft tires were pretty much dead very quickly and he had to go back into tire management mode. And then another mistake that Mercedes did was they pitted him very, very early. I mean, you could see where he pitted, and then when everyone else pitted, they were on much fresher tires. Lewis's tire offset was way too much and he was pretty much a sitting duck. Even George, who started behind him, ended up crossing him because he just got a better strategy. Hamilton was rightly pissed off about it, but they took a gamble and that didn't work. And actually another thing that happened, which a lot of people might not have known, is that both of the Mercedes drivers sort of had a heat stroke because their cockpit was getting really, really warm. You could hear Russell complaining about it, and actually after getting out of the car, they were struggling a bit as well. So clearly there was some problem because they did not go for the post-race interviews either. And they were hydrating and fixing themselves because that race was really taxing. Alonso did a great job with that tractor of an Aston Martin, kept it in points. And we got Hülkenberg in points as well. And Franco Colapinto drives like there's no tomorrow. This move at the race start was really, really good. I mean, he just went for it, didn't crash into anyone, didn't create troubles for anyone. Albon somehow did complain about it, but later on after the race, he did say that it was in the spur of the moment. Even Perez on the radio was complimenting Franco, and this has been a very unexpected performance because he was thrown into two of the very difficult street races, Baku and then Singapore. Managed to keep the car in one piece, managed to drive really well, and he qualified just 7 milliseconds behind Albon, and Albon's car had the upgrades that his car didn't. So I'm pretty excited what he does for the next 6 races. Now let's come to the controversy that happened in the last 2-3 laps, which kind of irked a couple of people. So Norris had the point for the fastest lap, and of course even a single point matters in terms of Drivers' Championship and Constructors' Championship. And in the last 2-3 laps, you suddenly see Racing Bulls pit Daniel Ricciardo to go for the fastest lap. Even though Ricciardo was not in the points, if he takes the fastest lap, Norris would not get that point. And immediately a lot of people started saying that this order probably came from higher ups from Red Bull, that they have to take the point back from their challengers. And this kind of feels a little unfair that Red Bull has control over 4 cars and they can do things, because you've seen this in 2021 as well. When Lewis and Max were in a championship battle, the AlphaTauri drivers used to fight Hamilton, defend Hamilton a lot, and then when Max used to be there, they would just let him by. So it's definitely pretty much on the fence. As long as Red Bull owns 2 teams, such situations are going to arise and these questions are going to come. But in the past as well in F1, we've seen some drivers letting other go for goodwill because they were fighting for championship or they don't battle them that hardly that they would battle other drivers. So these things do happen and it's kind of in the grey area. It kind of feels unfair if Red Bull actually would ask their sister team to take the fastest lap away from their championship rival, but it's legal, so they are probably gonna do it. And they kind of spun this off saying that it was probably Ricciardo's last race, so that's why we wanted to let him have one last go and get the fastest lap. Okay, makes sense, but if Daniel is not there in the next race and this happens again, then I guess more questions are going to be asked. I think it was a bit of both. They wanted Ricciardo to have one last go for the fastest lap, and at the same time they get to take off a point of McLaren, so maybe, I don't know. But this just felt like a very absurd way to say goodbye to Daniel Ricciardo. There are just 6 races left on the calendar, and especially just before the US Grand Prix, which is Ricciardo's favorite race, and they are somehow putting Liam Lawson now, and Ricciardo's not going to continue because based on his post-race interviews, all the discussions that were going around and all the articles that are coming by, this was probably Daniel Ricciardo's last F1 race. And I think a lot of this is down to the Red Bull power struggle as well. Christian Horner, Helmut Marko. Helmut Marko was always against putting a senior driver in the junior team because that team is just to develop young drivers, whereas Christian Horner was very pro Daniel Ricciardo, and now both of them are in a political battle apparently, according to the articles that we see. And the only reason that Nick De Vries was booted and Daniel Ricciardo was brought back, just they wanted to analyze if Daniel Ricciardo could potentially replace Perez Perez because Perez's form was dropping and dropping since mid of 2023. They expected Daniel to wipe the floor with Yuki and outperform him massively so they could eventually put him in the Red Bull. Now the next season is coming really soon. Daniel has not shown any special performances. He's more or less been on par or behind Yuki. Even in the Singapore Grand Prix, he was out in Q1, Yuki was in Q3. So that didn't inspire confidence in Red Bull to put him into the main team. And if you see the timeline, things have not been in Daniel's favor. 2021, 2022, he was absolutely demolished by Lando. Piastri immediately jumped in and he was much closer to Norris than Ricciardo ever was. Then Ricciardo was put in with Yuki and he didn't wipe the floor with him as well. So all in all, the expectations that Red Bull had laid out for Ricciardo, he probably did not meet them, and which is why this is happening now. It sucks, it's quite ruthless, and Daniel is a great personality, so seeing him go hurts a little bit, but that ruthlessness in F1 is why Daniel was given a chance and De Vries was booted, and now the same circle is repeating. Regardless, Daniel Ricciardo has had a great career in F1. Everybody's gonna remember him as this infectious, smiley, bubbly personality, and everybody likes him, man. I don't think Daniel has haters. And I hope that he sticks around the paddock doing some commentary thing or some interviews or things like that. He's just a fun guy to be around. And I just wish him all the best from my side and from all of the F1 fans in India. For Red Bull, the next 4 weeks are going to be very hectic because they have to figure out all this driver arrangement as well. And then they have to fix their car too. So let me know your thoughts about this whole debacle in the comments. What do you think about Daniel Ricciardo not having a seat anymore? What do you think about the Singapore Grand Prix? What do you think is going to happen with the championship fights? Because the constructors, I'm pretty sure McLaren is sealing it, but Ferrari could still fight for P2. So I want to know your thoughts in the comments. There is no race. There's not going to be any race for the next 4 weeks. There's not going to be any race for the next 1 month. So what do you want to see on this channel for the next 1 month? Let me know. We could make some other videos about F1, or maybe I could play the F1 manager game. Let me know. Or we could do a live stream. Discussing F1. Let me know in the comments. You can follow me on Instagram @YourF1Guy for all of the updates, and subscribe to this channel. We have 6 more races to go and we have to reach 10,000. I'll catch up with you guys in the next video.